religious communities themselves or religious leaders haven't really fully grasped, even now, the importance of the responsibility that they carry, because their constituency extends to the furthest corners of every nation. And to speak on behalf of those people and to bring their concerns into the policy agenda is, from my point of view, a core responsibility of religious leadership. And especially when that is coupled with the faith principles, the ethical principles, the moral principles upon which religions are founded, including for feeding the hungry, for caring for God's creation, for looking after the most vulnerable, for protecting the widow and the orphan. It's obvious that there is a responsibility that faith leaders have to carry and need to bring into policy discussions that affect those values and those peoples and communities. I think that, again, fundamentally from a religious point of view, but also I think from a political or government point of view, leave no one behind must mean that you start, your reference point are the most vulnerable, the most excluded, the most remote, the most impoverished communities who typically are left behind in social progress. So to use them as a reference point for whether or not policies and actions have been successful is key. Absolutely, it is one of the lowest hanging fruit among the SDGs. And we had, in fact, decades of progress towards zero hunger up until very recent times. That progress has been thrown into reverse by the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic, by climate change impacts, but especially by the proliferation of conflicts recently. And we know that so much of what was available for development budgeting has been diverted to military budgets now. So that has an obvious impact. But in addition, obviously, famine follows swiftly upon the heels of conflict in places like Sudan, Gaza, and even worse than that, we see increasingly that food, access to food, or the denial of that access is used as a weapon of war in many contexts now. And that's some sort of horrible reversion to medieval brutality. Again, I think it's a function of bringing the most affected people to the table. The people who know best what it is to be hungry, but also who know how that might be resolved within their local capacities and what they need in order to leverage that capacity for zero hunger. So I think it's a question of bringing food insecure people who are suffering from hunger to the table, of bringing small-scale food producers, subsistence farmers, because these are actually the people who are the backbone of global food security, not the agro-industrial complex, despite what we might think. It's actually the majority of people are fed by small-scale food producers or by themselves as subsistence farmers. And therefore, that's where the focus has to be, on the small-scale producers, not on the corporates. I think it's a work in progress. I think we're not there yet. But it's clear what the trajectory is and what our responsibility is. We have many top-level religious leaders or faith-based organization leaders here present in this gathering. I am not sure, with all due respect to them, that all of them are fully connected with the grassroots of their respective constituencies and are yet in a position to bring those people and those messages to the table. But that's the responsibility. What we have achieved, I think, is a good connection with the policymakers. We see that in the presence of Brazilian government representatives, Sherpas, members of the Sherpa team for the Brazilian G20 presidency. That's a sign of recognition of the salience, of the relevance of faith actors and faith communities in these policy processes. That's an achievement. But now we have to leverage that achievement and make it useful to the people who are at risk of being left behind. For the World Council of Churches, climate change has been, for more than 40 years now, a key priority. We were among the very first international organizations to demand climate action. We've lost 40 years. Despite the best of our advocacy, the only metric that really counts, the rate of CO2 emissions, is going rapidly, still in the wrong direction. So that must provoke a reality check for all of us about how we actually make the necessary changes, how we impact policies and practices in order to achieve a livable world for future generations. And I think that that is going to be achieved not by the quality, I'm sorry to say, of our advocacy, not by our moral influence. Because if that were going to happen, it would have happened by now. So I think we have to use the demographic power of our global constituencies, the millions, the billions of people around the world that exist within our communities, to demand action and to force the hand of politicians who are unwilling or incapable of doing the right thing. Well, I'll give you a couple of examples that are based upon current and new initiatives by the World Council of Churches. One is called what we call the Moral Imperative for Climate Responsible Finance. And what this entails is us coming together with some of our key partners, the Muslim Council of Elders, the New York Board of Rabbis, and UNEP, the UN Environmental Program, to commit to addressing this issue with our respective financial service providers, our banks, our pension funds, our insurers, and to ask a simple consumer question: are you using our money to invest in fossil fuel industries? Because if you are, it's not okay with us. That's all they have to do, just to present that demand from a consumer's perspective. And we believe that if that was done at scale, it would make a difference. It would change the calculus of financiers. It's a question of following the money, because that's what really counts. Most of our constituents, apart from the very poorest, they have bank accounts, they have pension funds, they have other relationships with financial service providers, and they don't necessarily know that they are implicated against their knowledge and against their will in maintaining the fossil fuel industry and continuing fossil fuel exploration and exploitation at severe harm to the climate and to the livability of this planet for future generations. Another new initiative that we're pursuing, is rather more aggressive, is public interest litigation. I'm a former lawyer in private legal practice, and I know that there's nothing that impacts the thinking of corporate actors more than the risk of litigation, especially if it might involve potential personal liability. And so we're trying to leverage that lever to work with our member churches in different jurisdictions around the world to undertake public interest litigation in their own jurisdictions, to really push this point and to change that calculus and those decisions that are being made by others.